This is Summer Lynn from Chicago, Illinois. Just wanted to give a huge shout out to the Relay for all the love and support they've given my team and I. And make sure you stay tuned for all the latest boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to start it off with the Rachel Ball versus Jorgelina Guanini fight. Ahead of this fight, I decided to go with Rachel Ball to win a points decision. And as far as the outcome goes, that's how it happened. Though everything from the opening round to the final round, I feel like that's quite another story. I want to say that I don't agree with the judges' scorecards. I don't think it was anywhere near that wide in Rachel Ball's favor. I had Jorgelina Guanini picking up at least 3 of the first 5 rounds when this contest started. I don't think that this is a fight where you can say it's as simple as going with what the judges like, that perhaps the judges like the come-forward pressure of Rachel Ball when
she's getting hit.
In spots, Jorgelina's getting off more punches than Rachel is, even when Rachel's the one on the front foot applying pressure. I want to say that whether Jorgelina was on the back foot or fighting in bursts, letting off 2 and 3 punch combinations on the front foot, it seemed to me that Jorgelina was getting off not just the cleaner punches, but the heavier punches as well. I want to say that Rachel looked to be
struggling early,
missing quite a few shots in the early goings of this fight. There was a defensive deficiency there that I think needs cleaning up moving forward, as in the early goings of this fight, Jorgelina was getting off quite a few looping shots. And while Jorgelina doesn't pack the biggest punch, if that were another fighter, if that were an Ebony Bridges landing one of those big looping shots, one of those big looping rights, I don't think Rachel would have been able to deal with the shot as well as she did. I'll say that the pressure from Rachel Ball was quite consistent throughout. Constantly on the front foot, trying to impose her will, trying to impose her size on Jorgelina Guanini. But for what it's worth, I think Jorgelina was able to contend. I think she handled herself very well, and all things considered, the size didn't seem to bother her. Jorgelina was able to effectively stay off the line, angle that head, angle that torso away from many of Rachel's shots.
Make a miss.
She was able to respond in kind. As far as I'm concerned, she got the better of most of the exchanges deep in the pocket, within close quarters. That in that crawl space, Jorgelina looked to be the more effective fighter, and that's often the case when a much smaller fighter takes on a much taller fighter deep in the pocket. At that range, it actually favors the much smaller fighter, the fighter with the lower center of gravity who can hunker down to get out of the way of any oncoming shots. The smaller fighter with the shorter arms at that distance, at that range, will actually have an easier time getting off their combinations than a taller fighter with longer arms, because they're going to struggle to land clean when their opponent is so close to them. They need a bit of room, a bit of space, a bit of real estate to get off clean shots. And deep in the pocket, Jorgelina actually looked more effective than Rachel.
She did.
What was consistent from Rachel Ball in this fight was the pressure and the pace, which I think got to Jorgelina in the later stages of this fight. She wasn't throwing as much, wasn't landing as much, and was still being backed off, whilst Rachel Ball didn't seem to have lost any steam. I want to say that the impression I got was that Jorgelina got the better end of the first half of the fight, with Rachel Ball getting the better end of the last half of the fight.
But there's no way it should have been that wide.
As far as I'm concerned, the judges' scorecards, they really don't tell the story of this fight. Not adequately, not accurately. If I'm being honest, I find myself struggling with this decision in association with this fight more than I struggled with the decision in association with the Courtenay fight. The Courtenay fight did seem like a closer fight to me, where Rachel may just have done enough. But here, I'm not actually convinced that the fight should have been scored this way.
It was much closer than that.
Nevertheless, I did pick Rachel Ball to win a decision. That's how the judges saw it, and that's how it happened. But everything from the opening bell to the final bell leaves me wanting. Congratulations to Rachel Ball for winning the WBC interim belt. This essentially lines her up for a Yamileth Mercado fight, and you'll excuse me for saying so, but having seen this fight, and having seen the Shannon Courtenay fight, having followed the career of Rachel Ball, I don't think here and now that she's ready for Yamileth Mercado. That's largely in part because I'm not actually convinced she beat Jorgelina Guanini.
Make of that what you will.
We then come to the Terry Harper versus Katharina Thanderz super featherweight title fight. A much easier fight to score, a much easier fight to interpret. Terry Harper very much fought the fight that I expected her to fight. A more poised, more controlled, more educated fight than what we saw the last time out with Natasha Jonas. She wasn't a slave to the moment with Katharina the way that she was with Natasha, and that was due to the textbook use of the jab. With the jab, with the lead hand, her left hand, she controlled all the action, all the space, all the real estate in this fight. Katharina Thanderz is a better fighter than what she exhibited yesterday, but you'd never know it because Terry Harper diffused her offense before it ever got off the ground, and that was by usage of the jab. With usage of the jab, which effectively kept Katharina out of her sweet spot, mid-range to inside. She needs to get in the pocket to do anything. Katharina is at her best when she can connect those short hooks on the inside. She didn't get the chance to do that because Terry Harper boxed a sensational fight behind straight punches and using those legs. I talked about that.
That's a part of her maintaining distance.
To keep Katharina Thanderz at arm's length, to keep fighting behind the lead hand, the left hand. Boy, did she really lay a beating on Katharina Thanderz. You know, my prediction wasn't a stoppage. I didn't envision anybody getting stopped in this fight. But in the ninth, the referee had decided he'd seen enough after Katharina was hurt by a body shot and was not responding in kind. After a while, she was just taking punishment, trying to survive. Good stoppage by the ref, and you'd never know it, but Terry Harper actually suffered a broken hand in this fight. I believe it was her right hand, and she showed quite the poker face, because at no point in this fight did you see Terry Harper hurt. I mean, she never took her foot off the gas. Chalk that up to adrenaline. Terry Harper is the youngest of the 4 active reigning world champions in the super featherweight division, though you'd never know it by how much poise and control and educated punching she exhibits. Steffi Bull has done a sensational job developing this young talent, this young prospect, who put on quite the clinic yesterday with just a jab, and currently is amassing what is arguably the best resume in the super featherweight division of all the world champions that reign here. That's right. You got Vivian Openoff. You got Eva Wallstrom. You've got Natasha Jonas. You've got Katharina Thanderz.
It's all coming together.
I'm telling you. Don't look at this fight and walk away from it thinking that Katharina Thanderz is somehow a mug, that she's too limited, she's no good. That's not the case. Katharina Thanderz is actually quite formidable. But if the fight looked the way that it looked, it has more to do with Terry's educated jab and less to do with Katharina. Katharina just couldn't get anything going because Terry wouldn't let her. Terry, who's got a lot of ring savvy for somebody so young, a lot of ring IQ, she prevented this fight from being harder than it needed to be. She prevented herself from getting drawn into unnecessary exchanges that would have allowed Katharina Thanderz to find her way into this fight. Terry didn't let it happen, and that was with textbook usage of the jab, which is often characterized as the most important punch in boxing. Yesterday's super featherweight title fight is an example of why it's the most important punch in boxing. And it's the funniest thing because in my prediction video, you know, I stated I had Terry Harper win the fight. But I talked about how Terry's not that much of a body puncher, and what does she do in this fight? She lands a body shot that pretty much sealed the deal on the whole goddamn jackpot. That's how she hurt Katharina Thanderz, with a body shot. Congratulations to Terry Harper for another successful title defense. And finally, we come to the main event of that same card, the Katie Taylor versus Miriam Gutierrez lightweight undisputed title fight, and this fight worked out exactly as I predicted, exactly as I expected. That speed, hand speed, and foot speed in and out game would be the determining factor here. Miriam Gutierrez, for what it's worth, isn't a bad fighter, but ultimately she just doesn't have the tools to deal with the hand speed from Katie Taylor.
That's it.
It's a situation to where, believe it or not, what's working against Miriam Gutierrez are the characteristics that she shares with Katie Taylor, that she can't beat her at her own game with upper body movement, with angles, staying off the line. She can't beat her at her own game, bouncing in and out of range, as Miriam often does in her fights. She shares some similarities with Katie. It's just that these are things that Katie does exceptionally well. Thus, Miriam was never going to beat her at her own game.
That's it.
Miriam is a big, strong lightweight, durable.
Yes, she is.
Showed her durability and wherewithal in going the distance with Katie, but ultimately this was everything I expected it to be. I want to say that Katie Taylor started off this fight quite aggressively. I think she wanted to make a statement. I think she wanted to go for the knockout, go for the stoppage.
She actually dropped Miriam.
Who never found her way into this fight at any point. I didn't have Miriam winning a single round, and that's because she was disarmed by the hand speed, the foot speed, the movement, and the angles of Katie Taylor. It was just too much for her, and I reiterate, it's because she actually does have some similarities to Katie in terms of implementation, bouncing in and out of range, picking your spots, trying to sharpshoot the other opponent. You know, Miriam isn't a pressure fighter. She's not just going to come forward, lunge forward, throwing a barrage of punches. She's not a volume puncher in that way. She never had the necessary style to give Katie Taylor problems the way that Jessica McCaskill did, the way that Delphine Persoon did. It takes certain ingredients to be a pressure fighter, and pressure fighting, that's just not what Miriam Gutierrez does. That's not her area of expertise.
Katie Taylor won every round of what was a one-sided contest, and I can forgive Katie not getting the knockout because power, sheer power, stopping power, has never been Katie Taylor's calling card. Katie Taylor's finer qualities are her movement, her angles, staying off the line, and her hand speed, foot speed, athleticism. These are areas where Katie Taylor is particularly exceptional. But power, sheer stopping power, that's never been Katie Taylor's calling card. She can punch, make no mistake. I mean, she did drop Miriam, but power in and of itself has never been Katie's calling card. So I can forgive her not getting the knockout. And I think that now what Katie Taylor's going to do is maybe take a couple of weeks off, take a holiday, wait for the winner of Breakus versus McCaskill 2 to emerge, and then challenge them. Challenge the winner, perhaps at a catchweight within the welterweight limit, so that perhaps she can become undisputed in 2 divisions instead of just one. She's already undisputed at lightweight. She managed to become a world champion as well in the 140-pound division. If she moves up to welterweight, fights for the undisputed against the winner of Breakus versus McCaskill 2, that will be 3 divisions, 2 of which she may have become an undisputed champion in. She's already got quite the resume. It's not even a contest with these other girls.
Nobody, and I mean nobody else out there, is taking on as much top-level, top-shelf competition than Katie Taylor is. Nobody, and I mean nobody out there, is taking on as many world champions, as often, as frequently as Katie Taylor is. You have to consider that in just 4 years, she unified the entire lightweight division, a division that stood divided for a very long time.
Became a 2-division champion as well.
In 2021, she could very soon become a 3-division champion, but not just a 3-division champion, but picking up some vacant title that nobody was holding. No, sir. She could become a 3-division champion and an undisputed champion by taking on the winner of Breakus versus McCaskill 2. Congratulations to Katie Taylor. We then move on to the final fight of the night, the welterweight contest between Brook and Terrence Crawford. This fight lived up to my expectations, but in some ways Terrence Crawford exceeded them. I had Terrence Crawford knocking out Brook, but I didn't think it was going to happen that early. I was surprised to see Terrence Crawford come out fighting orthodox, leading with his left hand. I've no doubts he did this because he wanted to offset the right hand, the chocolate brownie, as Brook likes to put it, the straight right hand of Brook. For those not aware, the straight right hand, that's a punch that most southpaws are susceptible to. That while that southpaw can negate an orthodox fighter's jab, that orthodox fighter's right hand, it's usually a money punch. It's usually a punch they can get off on a southpaw, given the angle that they're boxing from and what hand they're leading with. Terrence Crawford started off the fight as an orthodox fighter, and you figure that in the early goings of the fight, while Brook is still fresh and he's still got snap in those punches, he's going to be looking to land that right hand. So in the early goings of this fight,
you don't want to be fighting from a stance that leaves you vulnerable to that right hand. I think that's why Terrence in this fight decided to come out fighting as an orthodox fighter as opposed to what he usually does. Come out fighting southpaw, then switch off later in the fight when he's got the guy hurt. Better still, he comes out fighting orthodox, he gets touched. He does get touched.
Right, I got all puffed up.
But you really can't read too much into that when the fight didn't last very long. It lasted all of, what, 4 rounds? It didn't even make it to the midway point because Terrence Crawford stopped the guy. So, Terrence comes out fighting out of the orthodox stance. And Kell Brook is actually having success in the first 2 rounds of this fight, make no mistake, but that was expected. Those who saw my prediction video will know that I anticipated Kell Brook's going to look all right early. It's mid to late that I anticipate the fight would get away from him, and Terrence Crawford finished the fight before it even got to that point with a very short jab out of the southpaw stance
Kell Brook walked into.
thereby amplifying the damage it caused. It was a short punch, albeit a very strong punch, and it didn't help at all that Kell Brook was coming forward when it landed. That essentially dismantled him. It was all downhill from there. Kell Brook. Tony Weeks gave him a second chance after he got sent, I don't know what, 5-6 feet across the ring into the ropes.
And Terrence Crawford went to finish him.
There was some talk of the stoppage being a tad bit premature, but I don't agree with those people. I don't share that sentiment because Kell Brook wasn't going to go on to do anything at that point. He wasn't going to rally back. The only thing left for Kell Brook to do at that point in the fight, once Terrence Crawford was teeing off, was sustain more damage than necessary because he clearly couldn't protect himself, and that's the referee's job, to protect the fighter when the fighter can no longer protect himself. This was everything I expected it to be, and then some, because I reiterate, I had Terrence Crawford stopping the guy, but I thought it was going to take a little longer than that. And with this fight, like several other Terrence Crawford fights, I expect all those guys who picked Kell Brook to win, those guys who thought that for some reason Kell Brook was going to expose Terrence Crawford, I expect all those guys who were saying all that shit ahead of this fight to quickly evaporate or take to making excuses post-fight. They have no choice. All those guys who were throwing around the name of Egis Kavaliauskas ahead of this fight as a point of reference to how Kell Brook can do better than that guy. I expect all those guys to either disappear altogether for at least the next few days or take to making excuses in order to denigrate Terrence Crawford's victory because Terrence Crawford stopped Kell Brook faster than Gennady Golovkin did and faster, even faster, than Errol Spence Jr. did. Whereas you guys thought he was going to expose Crawford. You guys thought he was going to beat Crawford. You guys.
That's what y'all thought.
And that didn't happen. So now, you have no choice but to try to denigrate the victory and try to explain it away, try to explain away why you got it wrong. And you know, I'm not gloating, I'm not. It's just that if you're engaging in these practices to where you don't want to give Crawford the credit that he's due, well, you're the one that has all the explaining to do.
Because you picked Kell Brook to win the fight.
But you don't want to give this guy credit for proving you wrong?